So many things have ruined my childhood, so I go online to bitch and cry. It feels like all of Hollywood is up against me. They even made Optimus fly. New versions of what I grew up with are being remade, rebooted and retried. My adolescence is under attack now. I think that a part of me has died. Aliens, Predators, Marvel, DC, maybe it doesn't all quite stay.
Okay, well, except maybe for that Jar Jar Binks.
Could it be I've misunderstood? This podcast ruined my childhood.
Hello everyone and welcome to This Podcast Ruined My Childhood. I'm Phil Durasmo and with me is Eric Walensky. Eric?
Should I call you Weapon X, Logan? Call me Wolverine, snickety snack!
You'll be safe here from Magneto.
What's a Magneto?
A very powerful mutant who believes that a war is brewing between mutants and the rest of humanity. I've been following his activities for some time. The man who attacked you is an associate of his called Sabretooth.
Sabretooth? Storm. What do they call you? Wheels? This is the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
That's it, folks. This week we are going to be taking a look at the original X-Men trilogy. Now, the X-Men movies, when the first X-Men movie came out, I remember it was euphoric knowing that they were making an X-Men movie because I grew up reading the comics and was just, my body was ready to see what I loved in the comics brought to the screen. I know that I've spoken in the past on this podcast about my comic addiction I had as a kid, and X-Men was up there in the top 3 or top 4 for me. It was like a tie between Superman comics, Batman comics, Spider-Man comics, and X-Men comics. And those were all that I got. So when I heard an X-Men movie was coming out, I was just so insanely over the moon. Eric, how did you feel when you heard X-Men or thought of X-Men? Did you pay attention to the comics back in the day? Or was like X-Men just like, oh, hey, a superhero movie, I'm really excited for that.
Exactly. That's where I was then, because it's escaping me the year that they came out, but it was obviously it was relatively new it was kind of the infancy of superhero movies. Obviously, we were beyond the Michael Keaton Batman era, but we had not reached yet the Iron Man era, the 2008.
Right. Yeah. So X-Men was in 2000, the first X-Men movie.
Okay. So yeah. So I was like, wow, okay, this looks pretty darn cool. And as far as my childhood is concerned, I was a Batman comic guy. So I really only knew like of Wolverine and the other X-Men on the peripheral. I'd seen the cartoon here and there, so I was very familiar with Rogue and Jean Grey and Cyclops, and of course there was that incredible X-Men video game, So I was very familiar with that game, but as far as like having a real heartfelt connection to those characters, I didn't really have it. But just knowing that they were out there and then seeing that trailer, I was like, wow. Well, this looks pretty darn cool. It really, to me, had the same kind of gravity that original Batman had. That first Michael Keaton Batman. It had kind of a darker, almost realistic tone, I guess, if you want to say it that way. And I say that meaning a lot of the new Marvel movies have a less than realistic tone when we're going into space and everything's a lot more CGI'd. I really felt like this X-Men movie had a real grounded approach.
I can see that. I definitely can see that, especially since they make you kind of follow Logan as the everyman, but he has powers at the start of the movie.
Exactly, and I didn't really know that much about Logan's origins. I really didn't realize that his
Yeah.
claws and everything were bone to start, and that he
Yeah, it's interesting you say that you didn't really know much about Logan, because the makers of this film didn't really either. It
well,
seems.
and as my superhero knowledge increased due to both the internet getting a lot better and these movies getting a lot more savvy with the source material, and I started reading more and seeing more, and then I started going, yeah, boy, and we won't get all into the newer Wolverine movies, but boy, they're kind of doing a patchwork job on his origin right now, and they're trying to make it all streamlined and make sense, but yeah, it doesn't all line up.
Yeah. No, it was definitely an interesting take. I know that I loved X-Men when it came out in 2000 because the content of comic book movies we were getting was so slim on the big screen.
Yeah.
We didn't have a whole lot to look forward to when it came to comic book movies. So the fact that X-Men was coming out, and when it did come out, I was like, well, this is what I'm getting, so I'm gonna love it. And it wasn't a horrible movie. It just wasn't the X-Men that I grew up with reading. The characters were there, but they weren't fully fleshed out the way they are in the comics, and they changed enough of the backstories of them and didn't make the original team, and it just was a hodgepodge of popular characters at the time, save for one of the most popular characters that wasn't in it.
Who?
And Gambit.
Oh, right.
And Gambit was my favorite back in the time. Back in the day.
Now, in the cartoon, he was my favorite. I thought he was slick in the cartoon.
Yeah, he was so cool in the comic and the cartoon. He showed up in X-Men Origins Wolverine, I think.
Yes.
And he just had a pretty small part. Taylor Kitsch, is that who played him?
I don't remember who played him, but yeah, he had a very small role, and only because you mentioned the movie, my absolute favorite part of that Wolverine Origins movie, even though I did, I think I liked a lot of it, but again, it's very patchwork as far as the whole X-Men universe is concerned. I love that Daniel Negreanu, a real honest-to-goodness poker player, was at the table with Gambit. Oh my gosh. That more than anything floored me about that movie. So that tells you where my headspace is at when it comes to the X-Men movies. I'm more like amazed that legitimate professional poker players are popping up, and I'm like, hey, I know him.
That's funny. Yeah, I could go for hours about the Wolverine trilogy, and I don't want to do that here because it'll bring us way down.
We can do that later.
So, yeah, we'll do that another time. But back to the X-Men.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting that you say that these weren't the characters that you thought you were going to see, because again, I was a DC guy, so I didn't really have that much expectation, and our namesake, this podcast ruined my childhood. My childhood was not hinged on these movies as much as maybe yours was, from having read all of this stuff. So it's interesting. We're both approaching this from kind of two different perspectives. I think we both start at the fact that superhero movies were slim. This was one of the pioneers at the time. And so they're just kind of sitting there looking at this property like, what can we do with it? Well, let's tell a story that's sort of the X-Men, but sort of not. And let's hope there's more people out there like Eric than there are of Phil, and and just go out and watch this movie and are like, wow, that was really neat, instead of, wow, that wasn't what I remembered.
Yeah, I'm so torn when it comes to the original X-Men movie, because it wasn't bad. It was a pretty good film, especially when it comes to a superhero film. And the problem I had with it was, I think you hit it on the head with the grounded nature of it. The X-Men to me are, and I got back into the X-Men, and many of you comic nerds out there will remember when they rebooted X-Men #1. And, Uncanny X-Men, the two different comics they had, kept going. But X-Men #1, was they had variant covers that were beautiful, and it was basically the original team plus some new members who had come through the ranks, and they split the team into blue and gold. And so I knew the Cyclops, Wolverine, Iceman, Jean Grey, and Beast, and then the other team was like Storm and it's just we're a couple different groups of teams that were together. And the first comic, they're all in outer space fighting Magneto on his Brotherhood of Evil Mutants space station. And it was such an amazing story to like reboot X-Men as X-Men #1. And that's how I originally got into them, and then just kept going with X-Men after that. Started, going to comic book stores and getting old issues, following all the spin-offs that had come after that, like the X-Force and Excalibur and New Mutants, and just all of these different families of X characters. And then this movie comes up, and it's got elements of who these characters are. And, Cyclops is the goody-goody, and Wolverine is kind of the guy that won't listen to authority and does his own thing. But it still was just kind of not right. And Rogue, Anna Paquin, you can love her or hate her as an actress, but I absolutely hate her as Rogue. And they focused this movie on Wolverine and Rogue, and she was not Rogue.
Right.
She just
I
wasn't.
agree. From the very little I knew that Anna Paquin wasn't, not that it was all her fault, but I just mean the direction they put her character and everything was not what I had gathered from what I kind of knew of the comics.
That really floored me in watching this movie. Is I liked very certain aspects of it. I really liked Magneto. I mean, gosh, Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen as Xavier and Magneto. It is perfect casting.
Well,
like the perfect casting.
Exactly. If you're going to highlight anything that was amazing about it, is those two. And I think in every movie they have been in since, they are literally Magneto and Professor X. There's no other actors I can even think of. I don't even know how you'd, these movies are famous for reinventing themselves and rebooting themselves. I couldn't imagine who you could find that would ever do as good of a job as they did. That's, and then of course, if you're going to mention those two, and I think this comes up even more often than even talk about who would replace Magneto, who would replace Professor X, but Hugh Jackman for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, he played the role well, and he is now ingrained in our geekdom and society as Wolverine. But again, when the movie came out, Wolverine is this really short, hairy guy, and Hugh Jackman is almost as tall as James Marsden, and his hair didn't look like Wolverine from the comic, and he didn't have the same kind of voice that you hear in your head or that the cartoon made you think of with Wolverine. So there were just weird. I had a hard time with him as Wolverine then, but of course, as time has gone on and he's played the character so well and really, really, he dove into who Logan is.
Right.
He has transformed and transcended the role. But the first time seeing it, it wasn't as jarring as Rogue, but it still was a little jarring to me.
No, I agree. He may not have been there from the get-go, but as time went on, I couldn't, like I said, I couldn't imagine anybody else playing Wolverine. I suppose it's akin to the way I couldn't picture anybody else playing the Joker besides Jack Nicholson for a long time until Heath Ledger did it. But even then, I didn't think Heath Ledger could be the Joker. So even that was an amazing, different, and a different take on the character. So I would guess anybody you got to be Wolverine would have to have a new take on it, as much as I'd like to see Hugh Jackman just continue.
I don't disagree, but the problem I have with Wolverine as a character is that he is both complex and shallow at the same time. And Hugh Jackman eventually got to the place where he was the same Wolverine that's on the page. The Joker can be played many different ways because the Joker has been many different things over time. Wolverine has basically just been Wolverine since the beginning. All that they've really done differently with him is they've put him as a samurai in some comics, but even that they tried to do in the Wolverine, one of the Wolverine sequels that didn't pan out very well.
You just said something I
Um,
never really considered, but you're right. Wolverine is as complex as he is shallow. There's a complexity to the fact that he was this guy with this power who then was sort of taken advantage of. But then the shallowness is also enveloped there, as in all he was a guy with a power who was taken advantage of. So
yeah.
that's an interesting way to put that, because you're right. The Joker has had many iterations, even in the comics and everything before anybody was playing him on the big screen. But you're right.
Mhm.
Wolverine is just Wolverine. That's it.
Yeah. It's so interesting to be talking about this now and kind of diving into this idea and this concept, because all these memories from my childhood, like truly memories from my childhood, are coming up for me of reading comics. And I remember going to the comic book shop and people would be, and you'd know the people at the comic book shop when you'd go, right? The guy behind the counter. And then like, there's always the people that would be there every so often that are like the same frequent visitors.
Hmm.
And I remember talking to these guys when I was like, 13, 14 years old and talking about the new X-Men comics, and they loved Wolverine. And I didn't love him the same way they did. And I thought there was something wrong with the way that I was reading or interpreting the characters, because I saw characters like Gambit as having real depth and Cyclops as having like these amazing leadership qualities and depth to why he has taken this team over as his adopted family.
Hmm.
Um, there's so much about Cyclops and Gambit that I loved, and all these other people would always just fawn over Wolverine, and I didn't really get it. I thought he was cool and I thought he had really cool powers, but I didn't see him as this awesome, deep, like moving character that I could connect to. And so I've always kind of been on the outside of the Wolverine fandom looking in. That's how I've always kind of summed it up in my head, is that he's a complex guy based on what has happened to him, but he is a one-trick pony when it comes to how he acts and treats people.
Well, I mean, as you're saying it now, he's Batman, really.
Without the
Because
money.
with obviously without the money, but you're right. It's he's just a victim of what happened to him, and then it's how he treats the world beyond that. And that's all Batman is. His parents were murdered, and so this is how he treats the world now. And
Mhm.
that's really it. I mean, Batman, for all practical purposes, is also a one-trick pony. I mean, until you run into a Christopher Nolan to add a few more layers to it. But
Well, I will wholeheartedly disagree about Batman, but that's a whole different conversation, especially now when with the whole Bat family that they've been building over the past, well, I mean, the Robins and Batgirl obviously for a while, but the new Bat family over the past couple years, it has just really put a lot more depth into the Batman character in comics. But I think Batman is like an onion, and we could peel him down for days. But Wolverine, I feel like, has two layers, and it is his trauma from before he was made into Weapon X, and then his level of like not understanding who he is as Wolverine.
but see
And so that's all I see.
that's where I would agree they're very similar. And not saying that there
Yeah.
might be a little more to Batman, but ultimately it's his trauma and
Mhm.
then how he responds to it. And that's
Sure.
it. And when you mention like the rest of the Bat family, like having read the whole death of the family it was a multi-title crossover from about
Yeah.
6 or 7 years ago. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Largely, Batman he was kind of grumpy with his whole team. He didn't really want them involved, and he kind of
Yeah.
kept them at arm's length. And then, of course, the Joker gets them all involved. And then
Yep.
at the end of that series, all of them were Damian and Batgirl and uh and Dick Grayson and I can't
Tim Drake.
Tim Drake.
Mm-hmm.
They were all, you know, very kind of pissed at him. And at the very end,
Yeah.
he's like, "Hey guys, let's get together and have a team meeting." And the last panels of that whole series are every single member of the Bat family team going, "Sorry, Bruce, got something else to do. Sorry, Bruce, got this to do. Sorry, Bruce. Sorry, Bruce." And he realizes, oh,
Mm-hmm.
geez, I'm just kind of a one-dimensional jerk who doesn't really let anybody in. And honestly, that's Wolverine.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. You're right in that sense. They have, and in the past 6 years, they've grown the Bat family even more and made Bruce have to rely on them. And he's opened up a lot, which has been really good to read. But Wolverine, you are exactly right. And one of the things I also didn't like about getting back to the X-Men movie is that they made Rogue into Jubilee from the comics, because Wolverine always had a soft spot for Jubilee, and in this movie they made him have a soft spot for Rogue. But Rogue had Rogue powers instead of Jubilee's fun, like, fancy free powers.
a friend of mine, oh my gosh, he will mercilessly mock Jubilee to the end with her goofy powers. He's like, "How is that a superhero?" Oh my goodness, Jubilee, that is so funny to me that you mention her because
Mm-hmm.
he mercilessly will mock her to the ends of the earth. How is that a superhero? That's funny.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Jubilee shows up in one of the movies. I don't remember which one. I think it might be X-Men The Last Stand, which we'll get to in a little bit, but she's just kind of a side
Oh, very much
nobody
a
character.
side. Yeah.
But anyway, so moving on
Yes.
from X-Men, it did really well. So it was, gosh, I think it was like in the $70 million range for how much it was to make. Let me look this up right now. Budget was $75 million. The box office return was almost $300 million worldwide. So it was a smash success. People loved it. People went to see it multiple times. They knew they had a franchise on their hands. And Bryan Singer, regardless of what you might think about him and his personal life and all the stuff that's come out since then, he did a pretty good job making a movie that can play to everybody, although still being faithful, in a sense, to some of its comic origin.
And if it's on, I that first X-Men is a great movie and I'll watch it. There's a couple parts that are a little slow and then I might like tune out. Like if I happen to catch that part of it, I'll be like, that's this part, and then I'll just flip away. But otherwise, we've been focused on Magneto and Wolverine and Professor X, but holy smokes, Rebecca Romaine as Mystique? Are
Mm-hmm.
you kidding me? Is there a
Yeah.
better casting choice in 2000?
No, you're
I
right.
mean, is there?
She was great.
She's
There isn't.
incredible. I mean, rounding out that villain team, Ray Park as Toad, that was sweet. The one character that I just didn't like, and mainly because I just didn't buy that makeup, Sabretooth
Tyler
looked
Mane, Sabretooth, yeah.
stupid. He looked
He looked terrible.
dumb. Like, oh my gosh, that looked like unfinished character makeup to me. I'd never liked that, and I still don't. But
Yeah.
but otherwise,
It's goofy. It is goofy.
but otherwise, I mean, I liked his power, and I liked how he, sort of played into Magneto's little team there. So it
Mhm.
worked for me. But oh my gosh, Rebecca Romaine as Mystique, and then of course, rounding out the rest of the X-Men, you did have Halle Berry as Storm. And
Which her accent, man, people just rip her apart for the accent she had in that movie.
yeah, and that again kind of goes over me because I didn't know if she really was supposed to have that, from the comics or something, and it just that's one point, at least to me, that just sort of went over my head. Like I didn't really care if I even noticed back then.
Yeah. Her line of, gosh, what is it? Let me think. She says something about, what happens to a toad in a storm or something.
Do you know what happens to a toad when it's struck by lightning? The same thing that happens to everything else.
That is one of the cheesiest lines I've ever heard in a comic book movie. And comic book movies have a lot of cheesy lines.
That is pretty bad. I'll give you that. And that isn't her fault as much as it's the script.
No.
But unless I found out one day that was her improvise, I'm like, okay, don't let her improvise anymore. Here's what I will say about that first X-Men, and this is what I sort of have kind of come to find now that we've got like so many more superhero movies. That first one now feels to me like the way the first Avengers feels to me. Like it's good, but it could have been better. Like I feel like it's a lot of setup and joining and getting everybody together and not enough real meat to it. Like I've never really, really enjoyed the first Avengers movie. Except I did love the battle in New York. That was sweet. A lot of sweet shots in that. But otherwise, the rest of the Avengers movie is like, it's just, it's the Muppet movie. It's telling how all everybody got together, and that's how I feel about this X-Men movie. Well, that's just how I feel because then
that's funny.
Because then the second X-Men movie is one of my favorite movies, and I'll put that up there against pretty much any modern superhero movie as being one of the best superhero movies ever made. Agree or disagree?
Wow, I don't know. I don't think I can put it up there as one of the best superhero movies ever made. I think that it is. I don't even know if I would say it's better than the first X-Men. I think it's right on par with it. If I'd have to give them both letter grades, I'd probably give them both B pluses. I think I liked it just as much.
See,
but why? What makes you think that it's better or one of the best superhero movies ever made?
Well, because we're past the why are we a team? We're past that, right? We're just a team. Now let's go have an adventure. And the fact that it starts off with immediately a brand new mutant, Nightcrawler, flipping around the White House, trying to kill the president, and then
that was a really cool scene.
Oh, friggin' incredible scene. And then it's like, well, here's what's happening now. Now people don't like mutants. Now that we know about them, now that they're really in the mainstream, everybody's against them. So now we've got two different factions. We've got Professor X and his school, and that was played endlessly in the trailers. It's just a school. Is it? Or however the lines were, right? Yeah. It's like, huh? Really? And then cut right to the big battle of, charging into the school and everything. But then you've got the other camp with Magneto and the mutants who are kind of defensive and are like, hey, we're here. We're here to stay. And we're going to do what we have to do to protect ourselves. These two different teams with two different objectives, two different opinions about the way the world should be and the way they should be in the world. But they have to come together and work together. And I guess it's just maybe a personal thing for me. I always like the stories when the arch enemies who are ultimately always, as Batman has put it before, two sides of the same coin, have to come together and work together. And that's what made this neat for me, is I felt like you got a little bit more character development between Magneto and his, like, oh boy, here we go, Charles. Okay, Charles. And then you had Mystique, like, totally screwing with Wolverine's head by going into the tent as Jean Grey and then flipping around personality to personality. And he's like, get out of here, And that was just to her own amusement. And so you kind of get that. That to me shows a little bit more of her character and knowing, like, how to read Wolverine and what Wolverine really wants. You know what I mean? Like, you're getting more development out of the characters from that. And then, of course, at the end of the movie, okay, I can't remember how Magneto says it, but somewhere at the end, he says something like, truce is over, Charles, or whatever he says. And it's like, aha, that was badass, because it's got to end. The good guys and bad guys don't stay friends. But that, to me, kind of humanizes them all.
Right.
No,
you're right.
They're not just villains and good guys with the obscure perspectives of truth and evil on their side. They literally became real people to me. And then you had Wolverine after the big assault on the school. He had to take the kids, and he ends up with Iceman and, is it Pyro?
Yep, Pyro.
Yep. And they're all together, and he's got Rogue with him, and they go to Iceman's house, and Iceman's brother, who's basically just jealous more than anything that his brother has powers. He didn't call the cops because he felt threatened. He called the cops because he was jealous. His brother had a cool power, and he was jealous of it. And ultimately, that's what I think is at the heart of most of the disrespect that the X-Men get. It's us normal people who are like, why do you get to be special? Lock them up. Like, I really feel like that's kind of a underlying theme there. It's like the jealousy of people who are free to be different, and the normal people who feel locked into a normal life. And it's like, nope, you can't buck the mainstream. I don't even think, and I'm sure, like, the fear of the unknown is also part of why you want to, set all these rules for the X-Men. But I also think there's a jealousy of, why do you get to be special? Why do you get to go do this and I can't? Why do you get to throw ice and I can't? Why do you get to have claws and I can't? And I think there's a level of that in these movies. But that's why I like the second one, because I feel like they explore all of that.
The whole X-Men, when Stan Lee created the X-Men, he was looking at it through the view of the racial tension in the United States. And so there's an aspect of jealousy that you can see from one perspective, but there's also the aspect of they're different and we don't like them because they're different, which is what Stan Lee was really going for when he created the comic. He wanted to bring people together by showing them how someone with something different about them can drive people apart. And I think they also touch on that quite a bit in this too. The parents of Bobby don't like that he has powers. They don't want their son to be different, but the brother is jealous. So it's a very interesting dynamic between all of that. And that's kind of Stryker's motivation too, right? Stryker is a racist when it comes to mutants. He wants to destroy them all or turn them all back to humans, getting rid of their X gene. Stryker, of course, had the motivation too, where his son is a mutant and he's trying to solve for saving his son. In his mind, saving his son.
Oh yeah, see that whole part there with the messing with Xavier's mind and getting him to go and let's go activate Cerebro. Yeah, let's do it. I don't know. It was just good. I liked this movie also because I loved the version of Nightcrawler in this.
Yeah.
where he's got all those tattoos, and they're actually like technically they're scars
Mhm.
because he scarred himself every time he felt that he had a sin. And they're like, "Oh, well, you've got a lot of tattoos," and he's like, "I've had a lot of
Yeah.
sins," which again, it to me speaks to the, whether you look at sin in a religious aspect or if you just look at it as a person who realizes he's flawed and just can't quite come to terms with who he is.
Mhm.
And again, I think that's a very human, and like you said, Stan Lee approached this from a humanistic point of view of what was really happening in the world, or the country
Yeah.
rather. And I think you really see that in this version of Nightcrawler more than any other version, or almost any other mutant, where there's a level of who am I and why am I not like other
Yep.
people.
Mhm.
And even though I'm not like other people, that doesn't make me bad, but I'm also still bad, because at the heart of it, mutant or human, everybody has the tendency to be good or bad, and you have to just come to terms with that through your life.
Right.
Anyway, I really felt like that just came out in the Nightcrawler
Mhm.
character. I loved every scene he was in.
I agree. Alan Cumming did an amazing job, and his accent was just fine. It was perfect. He did a good job getting that accent right. Where Storm, oof. And then by the third
You're
movie,
not
she
letting it
drops it,
go,
right?
huh?
Or did she drop it in this one? I don't remember.
I think she dropped it
Yeah.
in this
Yeah.
one. I'm almost positive.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I like, you kind of touched on it before with the pyro going to, with them as in the school. I like how Pyro, as we all know, he's one of the founding members, of the original members of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. And of course, we had a quote unquote Brotherhood of Evil Mutants that he wasn't part of in the first movie. I like how he went with Mystique and Magneto at the end of this movie.
Yeah.
That was really, it was good to see a character that we know as a good guy, supposedly, in the beginning of the film, who you can see he has a bit of an edge to him, but you can also see how he was swayed so easily by Magneto.
Well, and again, that goes even to Nightcrawler. He understands there's bad parts of him, but he fights it. He fights the evil intentions to be a better
Right.
person. And I think it's just crummy that he didn't have that much of a role, if any, to the in the third X-Men.
Yep.
Like, he was such a major part of X-Men 2.
Mhm. Oh yeah.
I also think, like you said, Gambit never exists in any of these movies, which I don't know why.
Mm-hmm.
Colossus, he's got his little cameo in the second one. Why wasn't he a bigger part
Yeah.
of this? Why didn't you develop more of these characters? And I get it, you can't, have 10 people as a lead, in one movie. That's why, Marvel has it down now on how you actually do bring in that many quote unquote stars
Yeah.
and make their characters relevant.
Right. Right.
But at that point, I understand why you've got to kind of pick and choose who you do, but
Mm-hmm.
I think the fact that we both think Gambit is an incredible character, why he wasn't even a, they focused on Angel in the third one.
Who should have been a founding member of the X-Men, yet they make him a 18-year-old kid that has a bad attitude.
Well, I don't even like that they saved Beast for the third one. Beast should have been more prominent.
Yeah. Oh, completely agree.
Because now Beast is like all over these new ones.
Yeah, I do like though how they write it out that Beast was with the X-Men and he's just moved on to a different phase in his life. I appreciate that they did at least explain away that he was there once. But
well, no, but he shows up in the third
right,
movie.
and that's what I mean is he shows up in the third movie, but he's established as having been with Charles and been with the X-Men years before. But he left to go off and be a scientist and do his own thing.
Right, and work more with the government or whatever.
whatever he
Yeah.
was doing. But so I like that they at least gave him some backstory so that fans that were upset that they hadn't seen Beast knew that he was. Okay. They explained it. He was there. We just didn't see that part.
Yeah, that didn't sit well enough
Yeah.
with me.
Well, it didn't sit well with me, but they tried.
Explaining that he was on vacation in the first two movies, that wasn't enough for me.
So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention at the end of 2, before we get full-fledged into The Last Stand, is that Jean is holding off the water that is coming from the dam, and she makes sure that the jet gets off the ground with her powers, and the Phoenix power starts to kind of envelop her. But then the water rushes over her, and they fly away while Cyclops is scream crying in Logan's arms while Logan is holding back tears because they both loved her. And at the very end, you see a phoenix-like shape under the water.
Under the
Alkali
water,
Lake.
yeah.
And if anything in this movie made me excited, it was that moment, because the Phoenix Saga is one of the best comic sagas, maybe of all time, but at least between the 80s and 90s. And so I was really, really excited to see what they were going to do in the third movie with the Phoenix. And then 3 years later, we got the third movie. And it was a movie. I think that's the nicest thing I can say about it. It was a movie.
I didn't hate it. I still think X-Men United is probably my favorite of the trilogy, and I still think it stands up there with even the best superhero movies. But what's it called?
The Last Stand. X3, The Last Stand.
Yeah. The Last Stand, it had some really good scenes. Like, let's start with the highlights, and then we can go into the lowlights.
Okay.
But the whole prisoner breakout scene was friggin' incredible, right? Where Magneto is flipping the cars over, and then he finally storms his way in there because he's trying to save Mystique.
Right.
And then he starts opening the cells, and he finds Juggernaut. And just the cool way he's like, "What's your power?" And and then he's like, "Ooh, that could be handy." And then he finally gets Mystique out, and because she's been there for him the whole time, and of course we end up getting all that backstory later. But at the time, all you know is like that's his number one, and it's like, good to have you back. And then
boom,
the dart comes out, and then you see him just flat out turn and be like, "You used to be so pretty," and then just walks out. It's like,
heartbreak.
man.
You can see on her in her eyes too, the heartbreak.
Right. So now it's like, it's almost like mutant on mutant crime now, right? Like, all you were to me was a mutant. And
You were
now
one of us.
I can't love you because now you are not one of us. And that's almost the whole thing he's been fighting against this whole time, is we don't like you because you're not one of us normal people. And now he does the same thing. Oh, it's so friggin' heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But just, oh my gosh, that whole prison scene, prison breakout scene, I love that. If I'm flipping channels and that's on, I have to watch the whole thing.
Wow.
That's just so good.
That scene, you mean? Or this whole movie?
That scene, yes.
Okay, yeah. I was going to say, not this whole movie.
If that scene is on. Oh, yeah. No, there's definitely slow parts.
Yeah.
I can't watch the whole movie. But if the prison break scene is on and that battle at the end is on, I will watch the battle at the end.
Yeah. Another thing I have a big problem with is James Marsden is in the movie for about 3 minutes. He goes to Alkali Lake because he's still torn up over Jean having died. She comes out of the water or appears or something, and they kiss.
Whatever.
But she blows him away.
I hated it.
I absolutely hated it. Like, if
Why even have
the
James Marsden in the movie for that? Why?
well, they had to tie him up. They had to tie up his character. Although I would have preferred they just recast him and give the guy, whoever plays him, like the full headgear that Cyclops has, so he covers his hair and his face, and all you have is his nose and his chin, so that you can't really, like, maybe you don't tell that it's not James Marsden. But they make him, they kill him off, and so he is just now an afterthought of the movie, because they never really give it any other thought aside from when Professor X feels him blink out of existence, and he sends Wolverine and Storm to go check it out, and they find Jean.
Yeah,
But
they
th-
find well they
that's
and
like
they
the
find
end of
Jean and
Cyclops.
they find the floating Cyclops eyepiece.
The glasses, yeah, the visor.
And
But
that I hated that. I
it's
hated that.
yeah.
Why bother?
Mhm.
That was terrible.
Yep. The Phoenix Force, the way that they explained the Phoenix Force in this movie was absolutely awful. The Phoenix Force is an extraterrestrial force that has been in the galaxy for eons. And here they say that it's like an alternate personality in her that is extremely, like, I think he uses godlike telepathic or destructive potential or something like that. And so they make it so that the Phoenix is always inside Jean, and she's just like got split personality disorder. I hated that as well.
Now, to that end, I am not familiar with it as much as you are, as per the comics, but as a movie viewer, I didn't buy into it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, strictly having the only information provided to me by the movie, it felt very uneven.
Yeah.
Like, everything from Scott dying to that ADD personality was very, very uneven.
Yep.
It just wasn't. It just didn't make sense. They didn't connect the dots. It's like they tried to skip. They tried to skip too far with her arc.
Yeah, I agree. Agreed. Like, wholeheartedly. It was a mess. It was very messy. It was very confusing, and it wasn't true to the Phoenix Force. Which, if you're going to make a Phoenix movie, you gotta figure out how to do it right. And now that Fox tried twice and failed miserably twice. So, but we'll talk about the second one some other time.
Yeah.
The other thing that I didn't love about X-Men: The Last Stand is that they made Jean into a villain just to give a dynamic that I guess they needed, or they thought they needed to force. Where in the first movie it was the Brotherhood versus the X-Men. The second movie, the Magneto and Mystique joined with the X-Men, and now that they've split apart again in the third movie, they then have to take one of the X-Men and put them on the side of the Brotherhood. And it's like
Right.
they didn't know exactly how they wanted them to have conflict, so that's the best they could come up with. And you say that you like watching the final, like, action sequence in the movie, but I just think it is so messy and disjointed, and all they're doing is, like, for some reason the Golden Gate Bridge, it has a major part of this movie, and it doesn't make any sense. But aside from that, they just give us hundreds of mutants so that they can immediately obliterate them with Jean's powers. And it's supposed to be something that is, like, really, that's supposed to weigh on the audience, that, like, wow, look at how powerful she is. They have to stop her. Somehow they have to stop her. But to me, it really is just them throwing way too many characters in a film just so they can kill them off.
Yeah. And I guess when I say I like watching the end action scene, is I do like, even though I don't buy it, the bridge getting ripped up, and I guess just Ian McKellen as Magneto, just he's such a cool character. and you really feel for him, like, because you get what he wants to do. He's just trying to protect his people.
Right.
He's not really evil. He's just a product of what he saw happen to his parents and himself when he was a child in a concentration camp.
Mm-hmm.
You were different because you were Jewish at the time.
Yeah.
Now he's different because he has a power. And that power allows him the advantage against the similar people who would put him in camps when he was a child.
Right.
So now he's got the upper hand. So it's like you feel for him on that side of it. So when he comes to attack, it's like, you know, he's not going to win, because that's just not how these movies go. But in a sense, having again seen him be a good person in the second movie when he's partnered with Charles, and you know he and Charles share the same background, it's just one of them went one way with it and one of them went another way. I guess I like seeing that in Magneto more than, yes, just the decimated extra mutants who just get blown away.
Sure.
Blah. I guess I feel more Magneto story than anything else.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. I get it, and I probably would like the movie more if they focused a little bit more on that. And you know, it is a major focus of the film. Everything that you're saying is wholly accurate, but it's just surrounded by such garbage that I can't just hone in on it and appreciate it. Especially,
Yeah,
I mean, they
and
have
maybe,
Jean kill the professor, right? She
right.
phases him out of existence, or blows, whatever she does.
Mm-hmm.
And then they force Logan to realize that he's the only one that can fight against her, because his healing factor, even though she blows people away and turns them to dust, his healing factor will keep him from dusting. So he goes up to her, and somehow
I know.
she gets a moment to control herself and asks him to kill her. And he does. And what a freaking cop-out in a movie like this.
I know.
A superhero movie where you have a main character from your first two movies. It's like they're trying to play on us that she's sacrificing herself to save everybody else. But no, they're taking the easy way out, where you kill the evil force rather than redeem them. This movie would have been 100 times better in my mind if Jean had found a way to redeem herself rather than tell Logan he has to kill her.
I know.
But maybe if somebody had killed Cyclops and Professor X, maybe you don't want to redeem them. I don't know. I guess I can't really get in the minds of the writers and who directed this one. Brett Ratner. Of course, it's also not a good movie. Brett Ratner directed it, but still, I don't know. Kinberg, right? Didn't Simon Kinberg write this? I think Kinberg wrote all the X-Men movies.
You're going really deep on me now.
Yeah. Kinberg did write it.
Yeah, like I said, I guess I just really like Ian McKellen. I like Patrick Stewart. I think those guys did a really good job of being the leaders of their sides, and I could see their character. I could really feel like what their real story was. It's a superhero movie, so you're going to get the fluffy, fight scenes and the decimating of the one army and the other army. You're going to get all that. But I guess I just felt... So here's one thing, though, that you sort of reminded me of it, and I can't believe I didn't say this earlier. The one thing about the third movie that I thought was total trash was fighting the Sentinels in an imaginary friggin' dome or whatever. I was like, what a lame way to incorporate the Sentinels.
Yeah, it's...
That did not sit well with me.
Agreed. The danger room, they're in the danger room fighting. And I agree. The Sentinels are such a good foil to the X-Men, and they just used them in the Danger Room as a training exercise. But that was a cool scene, the whole training exercise. It was pretty cool seeing them all work together.
Well, it was cool until you realize it's just basically a dream.
Yeah.
Didn't happen. There weren't really Sentinels. They weren't really in real danger,
Right.
even though they're in the Danger Room. But yeah, that annoyed me.
Yeah.
I like the scene where Magneto goes into the church and they're talking about tattoos or something, and then he like pulls down his robe and he's like, I have a mark.
Mhm.
And I will never let somebody do that to me again. And it's like, ooh, like, dude, it's the caliber of actor. You know, a weaker actor trying to pull those lines off just would not have done it. But my gosh, when he talks, you feel the charisma. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
And again, I think that's why these movies in my head succeed, is because they got the perfect people. I wouldn't say they're ahead of their time as far as storytelling, but they were definitely ahead of their time as far as casting goes. To get the perfect people to be the perfect superheroes and supervillains.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because because even Batman, nobody thought Michael Keaton should be Batman. And he just did an amazing job. And I thought he was great. But most people were like, Mr. Mom is going to be Batman?
Yeah.
But when you're saying, hey, Magneto is going to be Ian McKellen. Ooh, Sir Ian McKellen? Oh, yeah. The one and
The
only.
one and only. The
You
Sir.
know? And yeah, and Patrick Stewart and then Hugh Jackman, who at the time wasn't, that well known, and but he just pulled it off because he embodied everything you thought about Wolverine, and he looked the part, and so I think that's why these movies really still resonate with me and make me like appreciate them. And while I'm talking about casting, Brian Cox as Stryker,
Yeah.
was brilliant. I love Brian Cox. My gosh, every role he's in, he's just so good. And I really felt that slimy military, I'm just in this for me. And then when he unleashes what is it, Weapon 10? Or
11.
what's the 11? Right. Yeah. Weapon X is 10. Yeah, so he's 11. And he delivers that line, and it was in the trailer. I used to think you were an original Wolverine. Yeah, I guess I was wrong. And then she goes in there like slashing away. It's like, oh, that is friggin' brilliant.
Yeah.
And then to see the other portrayals of Stryker in the more modern movies now, the more current ones, it's like he's okay, and I like him, but nothing beats that Brian Cox version of Stryker.
Agreed. Oh, man. Anything else about these movies? I know we just went back to X2, but anything else about The Last Stand?
Except that I will agree, it wasn't great. There's definitely some, like, I already said the Sentinel part was lame, and, yes, just Jean Grey decimating armies, but then, like you said, in a total cop-out way, being like, kill me. It's like, really? You have enough mental capacity to say that, but you can't just shut yourself down? It's like, come on.
And not even that she just can't control it, but the way you redeem a character is to basically have her commit suicide. That's I don't find that redeeming at all.
No. It's just so you don't hate Wolverine for killing a hero.
Exactly. That is you just I didn't even think about it that way, but you're right. You want to make it so that Wolverine stays the hero and doesn't do it just out of cold blood because she's dangerous.
Yeah.
He's forced to do it by her. So
Right.
Yeah, there it is.
Well, you could argue he's forced to do it, or you could say it the other way. He's given permission
Right,
to do it.
permission. Hmm.
So either way, it's a cop
Yep.
out. But I got a question now because this just occurred to me.
Hmm.
Why, for as important as Rogue was in the first one, why couldn't Rogue have just touched Jean Grey
Anyone?
in X3? Well,
Yeah.
right, but why couldn't she have done that? Why did it have to be Wolverine? Where was Rogue in all of that?
Well, that
Wasn't she having that existential crisis about
yeah.
taking the shot?
Yep, that's exactly her whole storyline was I wanna make out with Bobby, so I want to take the shot so I can touch my boyfriend.
That's what it was.
That's her whole story.
Right.
They took Rogue and like she never had depth of character in these movies, but they really pulled her back in X3. And
Yeah.
Anna Paquin, they were really hoping with the first X-Men movie that people would really love Logan and Rogue. And unfortunately, I mean, it all goes to the writing and direction of these movies, but unfortunately, Rogue was not well loved and well received, but Hugh Jackman's Logan was the best received. So in X2, she had a much smaller role, and then in X3, she had an even smaller role.
Right.
And that was all on purpose because they just wanted to give Logan as much screen time as possible.
So she got the Finn treatment.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. Yeah.
Anyway.
Mm-hmm. But you're right. So the reason at the end of X3 why she couldn't do anything was because any mutant that was near the blast radius of the Phoenix Force was being turned to dust. And Logan was the only one that could get to her because his healing ability kept him from turning to dust.
Okay. There it is. Okay.
So I'm going to keep going on. I really like lately I've really liked looking at budgets and how much movies make and whatnot. And X3 had a $210 million budget. We already talked. The first X-Men had a $75 million budget. The second one had somewhere between 100 to 125. There's no data on what the actual number was. They've never actually released what the actual figure was. But X3 had a $210 million budget, and this is the movie we got on that budget?
Yeah, but I would wager that at least half that budget went to cast salary because the first X-Men, again, in a time period when we didn't have much other superhero content, and that movie went through the roof, and then X2 again went through the roof. I guarantee salary is what ate up half of that 210. Had to have.
Maybe I don't know. It just seems like a whole lot of money for a movie that
You
is
don't
pretty
think?
crappy.
And again, actors are actors. I'm not saying anything disparaging when I say this. You don't think Patrick Stewart wasn't like, okay, guys, you got me at this price for the first one. That second one went bananas. I need a little more cheddar if you want me coming back. You don't think he would have done that? You know what I mean? Unless
Maybe.
they were already locked down into picture deals and they couldn't renegotiate. But if they had any wiggle room, oh my gosh, the way the X-Men movies were popping off then, again, as like literally the only content out there, they had superhero wise, they had to have up the stakes on what they get for their salary. And again, that's not disparaging to. I'm not saying that's bad that they did it. I'm just I would bet that 210, at least half of it went to salary. Because aren't those the numbers you gave that almost doubled, right? The budget of
from X2 to X3 it was double.
Yeah, I bet you that was all salary.
So I guess on that note, Eric, did the X-Men trilogy, the original X-Men trilogy, ruin your childhood?
No, they really didn't. I enjoyed the first X-Men. I really enjoyed the second one. Like there's just parts of that movie that I just still will and I'll say it for the last time, I will put it up there with the best of the best right now. And then the third one was just it was sort of a neat way to wrap it up, but there were a lot of holes, and just for every neat part, there were at least two not neat parts that just kind of counteracted it. So that movie's kind of a wash, in my opinion. It wasn't a very fulfilling ending, but it wasn't the worst ending. I would almost chalk that up to the way your average cinema goer will say, well, it's a superhero movie. What'd you expect? That's what I will say about that last
Yeah.
X-Men installment.
Interesting. Yeah.
It was a superhero movie. What'd you expect?
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting way to put it.
So ruined my childhood? Yeah, ruined my childhood? No, it actually, more than anything, it helped me, introduce me to some of these characters that I just really hadn't had that much experience with, and I thought it was handled well, and yeah, I'm gonna give this all a thumbs up.
All right. Well, for me, it definitely didn't ruin my childhood, but I do have such an affinity for these characters, and I really did think of the X-Men as like the top tier of comic books. So the movies didn't ruin it, but man, X3 really took the whole series backwards. And I think that's kind of apparent because X3 came out, it did fine, but it didn't do numbers like the first two, and the budget for it was ridiculous. They stepped away from making X-Men movies and focused just on their most bankable character in film, which was Wolverine, and then made a whole trilogy around him.
Right.
And it took a while for them to get X-Men movies back off the ground. It took, I don't know, 7 or 8 years before First Class. So, yeah, it didn't ruin the childhood, but X-Men 1 and 2 are fine movies. I appreciate them. I like them, especially during the time when we got them, when there was no other content. I probably in 2000 would have rated X-Men as like an A, and X2 as an A-, and then X3 in 2006. I know right away that when I left the theater, that was basically a D. But now looking back on them, they're all B pluses, except for X3, which is still a D. Yeah. So, long story short, I'll say it again: didn't ruin my childhood, but definitely didn't like majorly enhance my childhood either.
Yeah.
Eric, where can people out there in listenerland find you?
People can find me at Eric_Walensky on the Instagram. You can also check out my other Instagram account, Mr. Mist Mask, MISTER MISSEDMASK. Basically, during this pandemic, a lot of people have been wearing masks, and a lot of people have been discarding them, and they're blowing all over the place. So I started taking pictures of them and writing poems about it.
And they are some great poems. They are. They're fun. They're funny. You all can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Fildimo, FILDIMO. And also, please follow the podcast at Podcast Ruined on Twitter and Instagram. We hope this look back at the original X-Men trilogy did not ruin your childhood.
Could it be I've misunderstood? This podcast ruined my childhood.
You would die for them.
No, not for them. For you. For you.
Save me.
I love you.
I'm imitating Wolverine's antimantium attack.
Schnickty, schnoids.